Again, narrators note you can see that publisher Thomas Watson really was an experienced trial lawyer, and he had been involved with murder cases before, and it's one of the many proofs that Leo Frank was guilty. Leo Frank says he was in his office the whole time, and he's not aware that Montine Stover has testified to the police that, no, I was there, and the office was empty. I was looking around. Where's Mr. Frank? The inner and outer office were both completely empty. Where was Mr. Frank? He told the police he was there for the whole hour, every minute. Detective Scott said, were you there the whole time? He said, yes. And he asked him a second, were you there every minute? In other words, did you go to the toilet? Did you get up to stretch your legs? Were you there every minute from noon until 12:50? Frank said, yes, I was. Every minute, 12:50, I was in my office. Well, not according to Montine Stover. She went in to pick up her money, and the place was empty. Watson says, could there be more moral turpitude, blacker than that of a governor who prostitutes his office to protect blood guilt, and who endeavors to hide his own baseness by falsifying the official records of his state? Slaton did with a spurt of his pen, at which Burns, Rabbi Marks, Frank's wife, and Samuel Bornstein were unable to do by persuasion or by threat. He got rid of the evidence which convicts Leo Frank of the murder of Mary Fagan. The most persistent, unprecedented, and illegal methods were used by the Burns Detective Agency and by Rabbi Marks to induce this honest young woman, Montine Stover, to perjure herself. Narrators note to perjure means to lie on the witness stand, to give false testimony under oath. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and then you lie after saying that, and that is called perjury. Back to Watson. But these outrageous efforts were foiled by the old-fashioned honesty of this poor daughter of the working class. It was the snob governor of high society, gilded club life, and palatial environment that proved to be the rotten pippin in our barrel. Pippin refers to actually sort of a handsome young man or something, but in this case it's very sarcastic. In other words, he wasn't a star, he wasn't a hero, he wasn't a shining figure of virtue, so he was a rotten pippin. Rich Jews could not buy the working people whose daily bread is earned by the toil of their hands. Rich Jews were never able to move a single member of the jury, which listened for weeks to this damning testimony. Neither could Judge Roan or our Supreme Court be moved. With splendid integrity, our whole system withstood the attacks of big money, until at length nothing was left but the perfidy of a governor who, in the interest of his client, betrayed a high office and a great people. R.P. Barrett was the next witness for the state. He testified that he was the machinist at the pencil factory, and that on Monday morning, April 28th, he, quote, found an unusual spot that I had never seen before at the west end of the dressing room on the second floor. That spot was not there Friday. It was blood. The spot was 4 or 5 inches in diameter, and little spots beyond these from the rear, 6 or 8 in number. I discovered these between 6:30 and 7 o'clock. White stuff, potash or hascoline, was smeared over the spots. I found some hair on the handle of a bench lathe. The handle was in the shape of an L. The hair was hanging on the handle, swinging down. The hair was not there Friday. It was my machine. I know the hair was not there Friday because I had used that machine up to quitting time, Friday 5:30. I could tell it was blood by looking at it. I found the hair some minutes afterward, about 6 or 8 strands, pretty long. When I left my machine Friday, I left a piece of work in it. When I got back, the piece of work was still there. It had not been disturbed. End of quote. Bear in mind that all of this was early Monday morning, when no Gentile had accused Leo Frank, for whom rich Jews had already, in secret, employed the best lawyers. When the rascally Burns got into the case, an effort was made to bribe this machinist, but he refused to sell out. Narrator's note, this is yet another example of the profound and sincere convictions publisher Thomas Watson, who had been a congressman fighting for working class people, showed that he cared for and admired the people who toil with their hands in the factories and in the farms and drove the streetcars and were janitors and did the vital work that the common folks do. He was also the vice presidential candidate of the Populist Party, and he always had a great heart for the common people. He's emphasizing that it was the rich country club types that were in many cases, taking bribes and selling out. And that it was many of the working class people who refused to take bribes, who resisted pressure, and who got up and courageously told the truth on the witness stand. Jews, or by sold-out authors married to Jews, such as Steve Oney, O-N-E-Y, are just about infinite. Oney and Jewish author Albert Lindemann both claim Frank was a mere 5'6" tall, thus making him tower over the 4'11" Mary Fagan. But Frank's own application for a U.S. passport shows clearly that the black-haired, black-eyed Frank, that's what it states on his application, black hair and black eyes, stood 5'8" tall, 9 inches taller than his female child victim. And you can see at archive.org/details/Cornell Senior Class Book 1906, pages 344 and 345, it has Leo Frank listed as 5'8" and 145 pounds. Chances are that 7 years after he graduated from college and after his marriage, his weight would likely have climbed to 150 to 155 pounds. The description of Leo Frank in this class book from Cornell University says, Leo Max Frank hails from sleepy Brooklyn, famed for graveyards, breweries, and baby carriages. Blossoming in the cotton fields of Texas and finding Southern life too easy, he migrated to New York's slumberland. The far-fainted beauty of Ithaca's scenery induced him to choose Cornell as his alma mater. His genius found expression in three-phase generators and foundry work, where he soon gained the reputation of being the champion hot air artist of the university, by his happy faculty of talking all day and saying nothing. His services as a debating coach for the Congress debate team have made him a fame hard to equal. This proficiency as an air shooter will doubtless win Max success as a gas jet. According to Leo Frank's 1907 to 1908 official U.S. government registered passport, he was 5'8" tall. And what is the motive in all this? In this girly man hoax perpetrated by the Leo Frank partisans. The Jewish-American Leo Frank partisan authors, such as Albert Lindemann and the author married to a Jewess, Steve Oney, alleged Leo Frank in 1913 was 5'6", and Steve Oney claims Leo Frank was 130 pounds, making him, the weight of a boy, really a teenage boy, a thin teenage boy. In 1913, however, Leo Frank was 5'8", and likely weighed 150 to 160 pounds. Given what we know about human weight gain after college and marriage, as recorded statistically over the last 100 years from medical records. Men marry and get older, they gain weight. The intention of falsifying Leo Frank's height and weight by Leo Frank partisans is to make Leo Frank seem smaller than he really was in real life, back in 1913, and thus make it less likely he could have attacked and overpowered Mary Fagan, who was a mere 4'11" and 115 to 120 pounds. But a 29-year-old man at 5'8" and weighing 150 to 160 pounds could easily overpower a 4'11", 13-year-old girl weighing 115 to 120 pounds. The ultimate intention of the Leo Frank girly man hoax is to make it seem as if the murder was more likely to have been done by Jim Conley, the, quote, low, squat, thickly built Negro, unquote, what the lawyers and the Jewish newspapers kept saying about Jim Conley. Like he was just a bundle of muscle, whereas Leo Frank was just sort of a Woody Allen type nerd who couldn't even successfully attack a little girl. So you can see again and again constant, deliberate ignoring of the evidence, hiding of the evidence, and lies. In fact, Leo Frank's defenders have waged a disinformation campaign over the last several generations concerning the Leo Frank case has amounted to a social and political culture war for more than a century, first beginning in 1913. With respect to Leo Frank's hobbies included chess, amateur landscape photography, with a number of surviving photos taken from different parts of Central Europe, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Leo Frank played basketball and tennis on his college class team for 4 years. He was a debating team member for 4 years, attained the rank of debate team coach, and Cornell Congress debating team coach. Leo Frank was a gregarious athlete and scholar, which in most people's minds makes it much harder to believe he would commit such a grisly murder on Saturday, April 26, 1913, in Atlanta. Leo Frank was slightly blind in his left eye, which is out of orbit laterally to the 2 o'clock position. Leo Frank was a left-handed Renaissance man, active in many social and philanthropic organizations. It seems completely unlikely that he would lure a 13-year-old girl to the back room of a shuttered factory and use her temporarily laid-off status to help in sexual coercion, but he confessed indirectly 3 times to doing it by what he stated in his testimony. When Mary Fagan refused Leo Frank's advances on that Saturday, it would be the last time that she would refuse him. After 1 calendar year of Leo Frank's sexual innuendos and harassment slowly evolved into a frustrated form of infatuation, the obsession came to a deadly conclusion as Fagan's head slammed backward on the solid iron handle of a bench lathe in the metal room, causing her to crumple unconsciously to the floor. Leo Frank dragged her to the front of the metal room bathroom area and cut open her frilly and feminine lavender dress from the fringe bottom to the crotch area. Lifting up her dress, he then pinched and cut open her bloomers across the crotch. Leo Frank undoubtedly frenetically unbuckled his pants, pulled down his underwear, and obviously must have raped Mary Fagan while she was unconscious from having been struck, and then falling backwards against the iron lathe handle, which tore her scalp to the bone, and of course she collapsed. She fainted. As she began to wake up and cry, and hold her hand over the black and blue eye she had been given, Leo Frank realized he had only one permutation in this equation, given what the race riots of 1906, 7 years prior, had revealed about the Southern tradition of castrating and lynching rapists. So Leo Frank got up. He didn't want that to happen to him. Snatched a 7-inch pre-looped rope hanging from a nail in the wall, placed it around Mary Fagan's neck, and fist-flexed until his knuckles turned white. Leo Frank strangled to death little 13-year-old Marianne Fagan. He was born in 1899, died in 1913, at around 12:07 p.m. in the bathroom of the metal room on the 2nd floor of the National Pencil Factory on South Forsyth Street in Atlanta, Georgia. When Mary Fagan was found dumped in the basement, she was soaked in her own blood and urine, because people who are strangled tend to lose control of their bladder. Horrifying. And all this is found in the Leo Frank case, Georgia Supreme Court case records, 1,800 pages, and it's going back now to Watson's article. The state's next witness, Mel Stanford, had been working for Frank for 2 years. He testified that he swept up the whole floor in the metal room on Friday, April 25th. Quote, "I moved everything and swept everything. I swept under Mary's and Barrett's machines. On Monday thereafter, I found a spot that had some white Haskell-line over it on the 2nd floor near the dressing room. It wasn't there Friday when I swept. The spot looked to me like it was blood with dark spots scattered around." End of quote. The extreme importance of the evidence of Barrett and Stanford is that the hair and the spots were not there on Friday. As Barrett's hands had been turning his machine handle at 5:30 on Friday evening, the tress of woman's hair could not have been on it then. How came it there after the men and girls quit work Friday? And whose was it if not Mary Fagan's? As Stanford swept the floor Friday, the blood spots could not have been there then, for his small broom would certainly have swept the white powder. Mrs. George W. Jefferson testified that she worked at the pencil factory and that on Monday, quote, "We saw blood on the 2nd floor in front of the girls' dressing room. It was about as big as a fan, and something white was over it. I didn't see it there Friday. I had been working there 5 years. The spot I saw was not one of the paints. The white stuff did not hide the red. You could see it plainly. Unquote. R.B. Hazlitt testified that on Monday morning he and Mr. Black went out to Mr. Frank's house to request him to appear at the station house about 8:30 or 9 o'clock. Mr. Frank was at the station house for 2 or 3 hours. E.F. Holloway, sworn for the state, was the day watchman at the factory. He forgot to lock the elevator on Saturday when he left the factory at 11:45 a.m. Witness admitted that he had previously sworn twice that he left the elevator locked, once in the affidavit he gave to Solicitor Dorsey and again at the coroner's inquest. In other words, Holloway entrapped the state, which had his sworn testimony twice given that he had left the elevator locked at 11:45 Saturday morning. He had not notified him of his change, otherwise the state would not have put him up. Unquote. On cross-examination, Holloway stated that Frank got back from Montague's at about 11 o'clock a.m., that Frank was working on his books in the office, that Corinthia Hall and Emma Clark were coming toward the factory at 11:45 when he, Holloway, was leaving. Watson remarks, remember this, its importance was not apparent to the witness when he swore it. He was doing what he could to help his employer. Narrator's note, in other words, Holloway was trying to help Leo Frank. He had often seen blood spots on the floor, but didn't remember having seen those that Barrett found. Witness had never seen Frank speak to Mary Fagan. Cords like that found on Mary's neck are all over the place. They come on the bundles of slats that are tied around the pencils. Barrett found the blood, hair, and pay envelope. Witness's explanation of the difference between his former testimony about the elevator and that which he was giving at the trial is quite simple and satisfactory. He says that he sawed a plank for the 2 carpenters on the 4th floor and forgot about it. As soon as he remembered that he had sawed the plank, he recollected that he had forgotten to lock the elevator. Thus doth the little busy bee improve each shining hour, and by association of ideas, remember that forgetfulness as to sawing one plank revives the memory to the extent that one can recall what it was he forgot. N.B. Darley was manager of a branch of the pencil factory. He testified, Mr. Sig Montag is my superior. Mr. Frank and I are of equal dignity in the factory. I was there Sunday morning, April 27th, about 8:20. I saw Mr. Frank that morning. When I first saw him, I observed nothing unusual. When we started to the basement, I noticed that his hands were trembling. I observed that he seemed still nervous when he went to nail up the back door. Frank explained why he was nervous by saying that he hadn't had breakfast. The sight at the morgue had unnerved him. The elevator was unlocked. Mr. Frank told me in the basement that he believed the murder had been committed in the basement. When we started down the elevator, he was shaking all over. He looked pale. When riding down to the police station, Mr. Frank was on my knee. He was trembling. When my attention was called to it, I noticed something that looked like blood with something white over it at the ladies' dressing room Monday morning. Barrett showed me some hair on the lever of a lathe, 6 or 8 strands at the outside. Pay envelopes are found scattered all around. The factory is supposed to be locked and unoccupied by any person on Sundays. Frank usually started on his balance sheet in the afternoon. Frank is a small, thin man, about 125 or 130 pounds. That's what he's claiming. Of course, if a person is an athlete and works out and does sports, they're going to be much heavier because they'll have muscle mass, and muscle is much heavier than body fat. It's amazing. You look at some of these bodybuilders. A 5'8" bodybuilder could be 230 pounds. He's not fat at all, but muscle is very heavy.